Welcome to another Boxscore Geeks show. My name is Andres Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers, and this show is produced, as always, by the voice of God, Brian Foster, who you can find on Twitter as @BoxscoreBrian. Give a shout out real quick, Brian, just so people know the sound of your voice.
What's up, Dre? I'm even got my own box on the overlay this week, something new. So I feel a little constrained. Physical jokes are bad for audio only, but
Yeah.
maybe the video viewers will like it.
Well, what's even better, and we're hopefully planning on changing this at some point in the future. We've mentioned YouTube isn't as fantastic for this, but I can't actually see the video feed. So some of this, as people will notice, is we have a script pre-show, and I just happen to plan on being in certain places, and I'll say stuff so that you can start queuing up graphics as needed. So I can't even see it. So that physical joke there, I didn't even get it either. So that's why I'm not chuckling or laughing. Maybe it was hilarious. Viewers, let us know in the comments. All right, so this week what we've got is a silly, serious sandwich. What we're going to be talking about is the 76ers and can they ever win? And this is interesting. Well, we may actually get to see it by the time the show ends. I'm not sure. It is currently 56-55. The Timberwolves are up. Before we started the show, the 76ers are up by 12. Brian said maybe they can win, and then they had a horrendous second quarter, and there's a lot to talk there. We're also actually going to talk a little serious talk. Charles Barkley is the reason I'm into this, but we're going to be talking a little Ferguson, so just be warned about that. And then we're going to end talking about ESPN 30 for 30 and just kind of the implications. We had a little bit of a discussion about this last week or 2 weeks ago, Brian, and I actually just really enjoyed the conversation and wanted to keep it going. So with that in mind, let's get the show started. Something we do every week is we have a poll, and 2 weeks ago on our last live show, we had a poll about the Milwaukee Bucks and if they were for real. And all I'll say about this poll is I am the most proud of the two graphics I got for the yes no line. Not anything else. The Jason Kidd happy, Jason Kidd confused. This was just, I was so proud of that. I'm sorry. You guys were basically just as confused as we were. Currently, the Bucks are playoff bound. 68 say yes, and 58 say what? They're the Bucks. And what I'll say is, since that show, they've gone 3-3. So again, who knows? It's the East. But yeah, I'm still just really baffled by the Bucks, and it's one of those things we'll have to wait and see. Now, something we're not going to have to wait and see about is if the 76ers are bad. The question now is just how bad. So in the history of the NBA, the all-time losing streak is 26, and that is tied by the Philadelphia 76ers and the Cleveland Cavaliers. So the question is, can the 76ers get back on top? I mean, it's just, this is a horrendously bad team. And we've been kind of happy with them from the sense of sort of money management, meaning one of the things the 76ers have done well is that they haven't signed any bad contracts. They've either shed or traded all of their good contracts, and they've stockpiled picks. I've talked a little with Dave Barry about this, though, and one thing that we can kind of stress, though, is all that's well and good, but at some point, if you're going to be doing this, you actually have to pick up good players. And while they've picked up some good young players, or at least, I don't want to say good, excuse me, I want to say promising young players, we can't actually know if they're going to turn out to be good. So basically, the 76ers, they have to start turning things around at some point in the very near future. An article Dave Barry wrote, one of his suggestions, people seem to hate, which was odd, is what if we give GMs 3 years? And if they go three years without making the playoffs, you cut them. I might be able to give them a little grade for the curve in the West, basically you have to go 3 years and win at least 46 games and be in contention for an 8th seed. But basically I talked to Dave and I said, I'll tell you what, in a year and a half, which is when Hinkie will hit his 3-year mark, we'll revisit. But yeah, basically the 76ers have done the tearing down part correctly. Usually when teams tank, usually when teams blow things up, they screw things up. They do what the Minnesota Timberwolves do and trade away Kevin Love for nothing. The 76ers did things right. Even my dog agrees. But they actually have to get going on the building a team that's able to compete. And so with that in mind, we'll see where they go. They actually are up by 1 point in the fourth quarter. And, it may even be the case the Timberwolves just have pity on them and sit all their starters and sit everybody in the fourth because Geez, the 76ers are bad. I did want to talk a little bit about the team itself. Just it's remarkable how bad this team is. So on the box score geeks, if we actually examine it, what we'll notice is the top three players in terms of total wins on the team are Henry Sims, KJ McDaniel, and Alexi Shved. And all of these players are essentially average. Basically, if you want to get into weird discussions, I always talk about disliking wins above replacement and all that jazz. But essentially, these guys qualify as like replacement level players for a good team. I want to stress that being an average player in the NBA is not easy. Teams cannot just have them. But when we notice really good teams, teams like the Spurs, a few years ago, the Bulls, what we'll notice is really, really good teams just don't have any bad players. They have average or above. And unfortunately, at this point, all the 76ers have is three average players. Malcolm Thomas in limited minutes and limited games has shown potential. I don't know if he'll keep it up, but thus far, all of their young rookies, rookies and young players like Nerlens Noel, Joel Embiid, Michael Carter Williams, either aren't playing or playing terribly. Michael Carter Williams seems to have gotten worse. Someone commented this at me, and he's putting up very impressive cubic zirconian stats, is what I'll call them. 24.6 points per 48, 10.7 rebounds per 48, 9.3 assists per 48. But obviously the thing he's not doing well is his shooting is horrendous.
Dre, these look like Westbrook stats to me. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Westbrook's better than this, man.
Well,
Westbrook,
style though.
Westbrook, yeah. Oh, if you're gonna talk like that, yeah, like
Poor
basically,
man's
and
Westbrook.
poor man's what I don't know, like even an injured Westbrook, I would take over this Michael Carter Williams at this point. And it was kind of like last week when we were talking to Marcus Cousins, where the things that he does really bad. His turnovers are just horrendous. His fouls are bad. His efficiency is not great, or not. His efficiency doesn't match his points output, is how I'll phrase it. Um, yeah, geez. And same vein as Westbrook, but much, much worse. At least Westbrook is above average. Michael Carter Williams is playing worse than Kobe right now, and that's saying something. So, in regards to the 76ers, I actually read an article where someone said something like KJ McDaniels is a boon to the 76ers or a great asset. And when you have to compliment a player on your roster who would basically be competing for the 10th man slot on the Spurs, your team's in bad shape. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if they break the record. I'll keep close tabs. I think we'll hopefully end the show before that game ends. But if not, they currently are holding on to a very tight lead, 1.63-62 against the Wolves. All right, time for some serious talk. I actually got a lot of feedback on Twitter about this morning, and what I'll say is it was spawned by Charles Barkley. So obviously, some big news recently has been Ferguson. Mike Brown was murdered by a police officer, and I'm feeling really bad that I'm dropping his name in my head. Of course, this is going to happen right as we talk. In the
Darren
pre-show,
Wilson.
Darren Wilson. In the pre-show, we talked about how nervous we were both to talk about this, Brian. One of the things that happens when I get nervous is I drop names. So clearly that happened. So, Darren Wilson murdered Mike Brown. I'm going to phrase it that way. I have no problems with that. And there is a lot of, this isn't a black and white issue. Wow, poor choice of words, but this isn't an unambiguous issue. There was definitely a scuffle. There's a lot to be said for things happening in the moment. Malcolm Gladwell in Blink actually talked about, how easy it is for someone to fire a gun multiple times in a quick minute and how bad we are when our adrenaline is rushing. So I don't want to make it seem like it's cut and dry and that, the media, that's how it's gone in both issues. It's been depressing on both sides. You've seen people go out and basically, the St. Louis Rams got in trouble for the hands up, which at this point people are saying he probably didn't have his hands up. You have, basically Fox News going out and saying he was the worst person since Hitler. I'm going to say the truth. I'm not even going to say in the middle. The truth is going to lie closer to Mike Brown, a lot closer to Mike Brown. This is not a case where you even act like both sides have a point, which is something we were talking about. We'll get more into, Brian. But what I'll say is, it's definitely gotten very polarized, and that's gotten some issues. But Charles Barkley came out and talked about it, and it was very depressing, to be candid, because he said he went and did two talks about it. So basically, a few days ago, he went and basically mentioned about Darren Wilson not being, indicted, and basically said, black people that loot and riot aren't real black people, and doubled down on it and said the police were good. And he also said, like, here's one of his comments: if it wasn't for the cops, we'd be living in the wild, wild west in our neighborhoods. We can't pick out certain incidents that don't go away and act like the cops are all bad. Now, that's all well and good, I suppose. But one of the things I sent you, I love the Vox site. So if you're not following Vox, people go over. But, one of the things that we just have to be very candid about in this country is the disproportionate amount of, how minorities are treated versus white people. And wow, it's a shame. I thought this Vox article had it, so apologies, Brian. I gave you the wrong link. But if you go to the Vox Twitter account, they have it up. But basically, if you just look at how frequently, black people are arrested, their court sentencing, how often they are, killed, and wow, my just perfect as I mentioned, my mouse is just going to decide to stop working because I'm trying to look this up in front of me, Brian. But it's disproportionate. We can't act as if white people and black people in this country are treated the same by cops. And it gets very offensive when you see people like Charles Barkley come up and try and act like people are overreacting when the truth of the matter is, if you actually look at the statistics, it's not in favor of people. And by the way, the tweet, Brian, I think I have up. If you just go to the Vox Twitter account, they have that graphic up. So additionally, though, I want to talk two things, and this is what I started tweeting about that just really annoy me about Ferguson. And so, in regards to Mike Brown, there have been protests, and people might call looting and rioting is what people have been proclaiming it as. We should stress is that the peaceful protest that everybody seems to be clamoring for, police were really quick to come out in riot gear, use tear gas, just horrendous treatment of people. So it's interesting that people are saying you need to do this when they did that, the media, was more concerned about things like American Idol, I'm sure, than it. But the idea about looting and behaving properly, and Charles Barkley, even he was coming out and basically said the people in Ferguson who are looting and rioting aren't real black people, which is just a bizarre statement to say. What drives me crazy about this, if we look at our nation, the United States of America, and you look at the Revolutionary War, we were looters and rioters. I actually got in a discussion online briefly with someone where I brought this up today, and they framed it as we were fighting against a foreign government that was taxing us without representation. No, at that time in our history, the British government was the ruling party, so to speak. We were unhappy with their policies, and the patriots that founded this nation looted, and then additionally, they dressed up as Native Americans when they did this, giving a premonition for the Washington Redskins or the Cleveland Indians about just, misusing Native American imagery. So in our history, we've done these things, and there's a very clear difference as to why in some cases it's okay, in some cases it's not, and it usually boils down to race. So I just get really mad at people who talk about the looting and rioting and frame it as this is always acceptable, this is never acceptable. And then kind of just you have to really gloss over a lot of the United States history that says this is part of what built the people that made this nation. And if you want to say it's not okay, that's fine. But don't act as if this group of people doing it now is the first group in our history to do it and that they are suddenly the most evil people in the world to do it when we, lionize this in our history classes. So that was my take, and I tweeted about that earlier today. And then the other thing that bugs me is just if you
Dre,
look at
before you keep going, I want to ask you one question about that first part.
let's
One
go.
thing you said, so I haven't gotten a chance to hear Barkley's statement yet, so I don't know exactly what he said, but the part about not real black people, I want to tie this back into analytics and science and all that. Is he a victim of the no true Scotsman fallacy with what he said, or not quite?
Oh, fantastic! I'm definitely gonna have to link the Idea Channel explanation of the No True Scotsman. Yeah, this and by the way, I was initially going to talk a little Gamergate this week, and then Ferguson trumped it because there are things more important than people lying about ethics in video games. I did make it onto a social justice warrior list of people that should be blocked. Although, in regards to some people talk about it, I don't want to. I'm not going to give a link to that because the person who made it is apparently a horrible person. I don't want to give them any more press than I did on the initial tweet. But yeah, we basically see this kind of thing happening. I'm not going to say he falls for the no true Scotsman. So for those that don't know, the way this tends to work is you have an ideology, and then when people question your ideology, you'll basically say, well, the person who did that, they weren't a real, I'm going to go with Gamergate because that's the least offensive examples I can think of. There are other ones that'll make people mad. But they go, real gamers don't do this. And you go, well, these people did it. They go, well, they weren't real gamers. They weren't real gamer gators. And him doing that, I wouldn't say not really. I would say it's just more victim blaming. We talked a little bit about it here. And one of the things that, kind of annoys me, and I think Hannibal Buress, when he was talking about Bill Cosby, let's just go right into the weeds, Brian. When he was talking about Bill Cosby and the rape allegations, one of the things he brought up is that Bill Cosby had this attitude of, if black people want to be accepted by the mainstream, pull up your damn pants, kind of that old grandpa thing. And then, Charles Barkley even ends this with, there's a perception among some black people that if you're not a thug or a hood rat, you don't wear your pants down. See, oh my God, like the same thing. The pants down thing, by the way, is the short skirt equivalent in victim blaming. The idea being that in cases of sexual assault, people say what were they wearing. We run into this with racism too, where you basically say because you were wearing your pants down, it was okay for the police to discriminate against you. And then he ends that with, after the pants come and he goes, and they're holding us back, plain and simple. And I ain't shutting up and I ain't backing down. So basically, he goes full out victim blaming. It's not the people in Ferguson's fault that the police just disproportionately treat black people incorrectly, and that's actually a nationwide problem. It's their fault, and we act as if this rioting and looting just appeared out of nowhere, as if there wasn't context, as if there weren't weeks of buildup to this. So that drives me nuts. It's victim blaming. And then the second note I just have, and we talked about this pre-show, Brian, is just a person was murdered. And the idea that these other actions even come close on the scales just just utterly maddened me when I read about it. And Dave Barry actually put this on his Facebook somewhere. I'll see if I can look up the link. But he basically pointed out when somebody does something horrible, this is known as cognitive dissonance. You're trying to hold two ideas in your head at the same time. So you trust the police, they do something horrible. You kind of can't hold those in your head at the same time. I trust the police, but they did something horrible. So the way you reconcile this, you go, oh, well, Mike Brown deserved it, or oh, Trayvon Martin deserved it. And that's just absurd to me. In my mind, this notion that those are anywhere close, that we value that the people are freaking out more about property damage than they are about human lives is just very troubling to me. And the fact that, by the way, that the thing that caused this incident was not the store. So that's in the story. Mike Brown may have shoplifted some cigarettes from a store and gotten an altercation with the store owner. And then, that's when everything after that started. He was pulled over for jaywalking. And then we know what happened. He was pulled over for jaywalking. There was a scuffle with him and the police officer at the car. The accounts from the police officer are iffy, but we'll give that. And then basically he was shot once. He ran away from the police officer and was shot many more times. That's what ended up happening. Yeah. But all I'm saying is the idea that property damage or injuries to a police officer or some cigarettes even justify the death are just absurd. And when you do that, like this is what you were saying, Brian, pre-show, is we like to look at the magnitude of things in sports. When we look at Klay Thompson, when we look at Kevin Love, we say, yeah, we can compare these two players next to each other, but it's really important to compare the magnitude. You don't just count Kevin Love is good at these three things. Klay Thompson is good at these three things. Therefore, they're equal. You have to look at the magnitude of each of those things. And I'm sorry, human life is going to trump property damage every day of the week to me. I'm really sorry about that. So when people bring that up, it does madden me. It does make me depressed. And then I guess just one last note to end on about Charles Barkley is the skewed perspective people that are rich or famous have about reality. And I thought it made him a really bad person to actually talk about this because I don't think he has the right perspective. For example, according to his Wikipedia page, and you recall this didn't happen that far in the past, Charles Barkley was pulled over for drunk driving. He ran a stop sign. After he was pulled over, he refused a sobriety test. Eventually, they took a blood sample, found out he was drunk, and he actually had to serve some prison time. Now, I just want to put that in perspective, which is to say, clearly Charles Barkley got preferential treatment in regards to that. And, it didn't even slow him. He got a Weight Watchers campaign after it. His interaction with the police is not a normal person's interaction with the police. Another example I brought up, I confused the two, but Amanda Bynes and Lindsay Lohan. You look at Lindsay Lohan, and she's gotten in trouble with the law multiple times. They basically said, you have to show up to prison. And she's been like, yeah, I'll be there. And then she doesn't. So like that there. And one of the best examples of this ever, or not examples, skits on this was the Chappelle Show. He basically said he would love it if just one day white collar criminals were treated like black criminals. in the United States. And it's one of the best sketches. I'll see if it's on YouTube. If not, I'll link it. But, just rich people, entitled people, white people versus black people, they're not treated the same. And so when you start talking down and say, all you need to do for the police not to treat you wrong is pull up your pants. All you need to do is, behave properly and just ignore the disproportionality. That kind of just maddens me and makes me sad. And then the last person, Chris Rock basically mentioned that. He said, people don't realize the disparity between rich and poor. And as I mentioned in the pre-show, Brian, like just the argument in lockouts brings this up because people say the millionaires versus the billionaires. And this right there just proves that the United States just is bad at math because that is a huge disparity between the millionaires and the billionaires. That'd be like if you and I were talking, I said, you have $100 in your pocket, I have $100,000 in your pocket. We're pretty much even. We both have money in our pocket. Are you crazy? But that's the millionaires versus billionaires argument. People don't understand the disparity between just rich and ultra rich. So the fact that they don't understand the disparity between rich and poor isn't really all that surprising. So wow, Brian, I think we managed to get through that pretty good. We'll see if we offended anybody. But I think you said you didn't have too much to say on that. So I'll give a brief pause before I go into ESPN 30 for 30 if you want to hop in. But if not, I'll let you start off the ESPN 30 for 30 topic.
No, you covered it all. And yeah, that's just what I've been trying to tell people about this is just before you start talking about how Brown stole the cigarettes or whatever, just think if getting killed is an appropriate punishment for that. I don't think it is.
Yep. All right. So last 2 weeks, I keep saying last week, apologies. We didn't have a show last week. I mentioned I might try and do something with my brother. Good news, his career's going well. He was actually filming a commercial, so we didn't have time to do as much show stuff as I wanted. But holidays went well otherwise. And 2 weeks ago, we were talking just kind of about some ESPN 30 for 30 stuff in the shoutouts. And I said, why don't we do a whole subject on this? Because you and I, in emails, in discussion, and pre-shows, have just done a lot of talk about sports punditry, particularly ESPN 30 for 30 and how it kind of reveals some parts of it. And I said, why don't we talk college athletics on ESPN 30 for 30? And so I'll make sure on the show notes to have a complete list of these, but ESPN 30 for 30 has a great number of documentaries that I will say are about or relate to college athletics. I'll list them off. It's the Fab Five, the Dotted Line, Unguarded, Roll Tide, Roll Eagle, Broke, You Don't Know Bo, Survive and Advance, Elway to Marino, Youngstown Boys, Requiem for the Big East, Brian and the Boz, Rand University, and the U parts 1 and 2. And the last one you saw was just Brian and the Boz, which is what really got us going. And I just loved ESPN 30 for 30 for kind of examining this. And I'll actually let you get started because you sent a really good link about very serious people. And you, on multiple occasions on the show, have talked kind of about your problems with just kind of the talking heads of the sports pundits. So I actually want to let you just go there, and I'll hop in with my thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got the rationalwiki.org definition of very serious people up right now, and I'll paraphrase it briefly on the show. Basically, this is a term that, according to this, it was originated from irreverent blogger Atrios, who I haven't personally heard of, but it was picked up and popularized by economist Paul Krugman. And really what it's about, at least to me, is sort of intentional or accidental dishonesty in the media. And it's interesting. And I see a lot of this in the Brian and the Boz case. And maybe.
And so, by the way, based on your link, the three things that it says is you're being dishonest and self-serving.
Yeah.
You're presenting facile common sense analysis as great wisdom, and consistently getting political predictions or policy recommendations wrong. So anyway, continue with Brian and the Boz. I just want to let our viewers in case they didn't stop to go read the thing first.
Yeah, I guess my personal definition for it is something that we talk a lot about on the show is sort of the narrative getting in the way of science and rational thinking, right? That's the part of it that is most interesting to me here and in sports. So, yeah, at any rate, but Brian Bosworth, according to the 30 for 30 documentary anyway, he was one of the first guys to go against the NCAA. And it was really interesting how it ends up. He was a great marketer, a great promoter. They had a piece in it about how he turned himself into a villain with one fan base and then in turn sold T-shirts against himself to those people.
Do you know what that fan base was and who?
That's that good point, Dre. Your Denver Broncos.
Amazing.
Your Denver Broncos.
It was the Denver Broncos and by the way, John Elway Brian Bosworth, by the way, just so you're aware, he was one of the top prospects. He ended up going to Ohio, right? And I mess up call. I forget states. I forget universities.
So
So
he went to Oklahoma, played for
Oklahoma.
Barry
Did I say
Switzer.
Ohio?
Yeah.
Ah, sorry.
And
He
then
went to
Barry Switzer is a very flamboyant college coach at the time. Apparently, he rubbed off on Bosworth and he became flamboyant as well. Then he went to the pros for 2 years, ended his career due to injury, but had a good 2 years. So, yeah, that was his
yeah.
playing career.
And so one of the key points about what you're saying here is in college, he became kind of one of the first, what I'd call kind of like college megastars. This kind of becomes normal
Yes.
now, especially for the NBA, where you have the one and done. So you have these highly touted prospects that you're just following all through college very
Did the
closely.
documentary say he was the first sports bad boy? I'm not sure if they did, because you've got like Jack
Well, there's
Tatum
no way
and
he was the first sports bad boy. 'Cause you had like
depends
the
on how you
Detroit,
define it, right? It depends
you
how
had
you
like
define
the
it.
you had like the Detroit Pistons bad boys who were before him. So,
Were they? Oh yeah, I guess they were. Good point. But
but I mean,
go ahead.
what he really did, like to your point, is he definitely embraced the role. And one of the things we talk about a lot on this show, particularly when Arturo's on, is professional wrestling and this
Mm-hmm.
idea of baby faces and heels. And kind of when you actually listen to a lot of wrestling documentaries or talking heads or shoots, they'll basically
Beyond the
mention that
Mat is amazing. Everyone should watch that.
it is. I have that, and then I really Mick Foley's. I think it's called Have a Nice Day or something or whatever, but his is really good too. Um, and Wrestling with Shadows is sorry.
Mm.
But no, I mean, you actually have these wrestlers talk about wanting to be heels for very so like Triple H, for instance, mentioned once he wanted to be a heel because he was smart enough to recognize that at the same time Steve Austin and The Rock were getting really big, and he basically went, if I want to be a major name in this field, well, I'm not competing with those two guys, and they have this role. So if I want to be on par, right, I need to be the bad guy. And in fact, with Brian and the Boz, one of the things they mentioned is he came in around the same time as Bo Jackson.
Oh, and
And
he opposite personality is what they said, right?
it was perfect. And basically, when he talked about it, so he basically called out Bo Jackson, and then in their game against each other, there was a goal line thing, and Bo Jackson just plowed over Bosworth, and he ran for something like 220 yards that game. Bo Jackson really is the yin to Bosworth is yang. He was just a nice guy all around, liked, but career ended way too soon due to injuries. Also got into fights with the NCAA, so perfect yin and yang there. But yeah, I mean, basically that point there, which is if I want to be a big name in sports, I'm not going to compete. I'm on defense, he's on offense. I'm not going to compete with this guy. But if I'm a villain, people will know me, and people, I think that's one of the brilliant parts is he was defense, and I think defense in general doesn't get as much credit as offense in football. So that for me, him having hair that people wanted to see, making sure he took off his helmet, doing all that stuff, just brilliant marketing on his part.
Yeah, and then the second part of it is the way that the media, the NCAA, and the NFL reacted to him is pretty self-serving. And this ties into all these other stories about the NFL that we have been talking about. And the league just kind of ends up doing the same thing. And by that I mean domestic violence, concussions, all these issues. The league benefits from this violent game where these guys will destroy their own bodies, they'll destroy other people, they'll get concussions. There is even a NewsHour story this week about how Arturo said this on the show a few months ago, and it might have been a crazy conspiracy theory then, that these two issues are combined, that the CTE that the concussions are giving are causing these normally peaceful guys to become violent in their households. But now it's on the NewsHour, so the league
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
and I was going to say on that PBS News, because I didn't catch that connection as much on that,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, one thing the Congresswoman said was, the NFL just isn't punitive on these things. And I don't even want to say punitive. I'll say they are less interested in correcting the problem. So even if that means jail time or whatever, they're less interested in that than shutting down the scandal. And so we've seen this happen a lot in sports. If you can get the victim to just shut up and not say anything, you've won because they'll get out of the public eye. And actually, we can never go a week without bringing up Jonathan Weiler because he's amazing. Also, apologies. I called him Josh because I combined Josh Weil and Jonathan Weiler. Apologies, you're both amazing.
Oh, you fixed that live on that broadcast. I remember it.
I didn't fix it live.
Oh, you didn't?
Because I listened to the show and
Maybe it was we talked about it afterwards.
Dang it, Dre. I did that. But okay. So Jonathan Weiler at the ESPN Watch, he's brought up that point that it's just they don't have an incentive to really fix these problems or correct it. And the NFL is just going to shut down the victim. And if they can shut down the victim, they're fine, and it was just really offensive. His point was that ESPN actually did a piece from Ray Rice's, I think she's his wife now, but fiance at the time, where she was just like, I don't blame him. And he was like, given what we know about domestic abuse and how victims tend to internalize things and how they react, this is just offensive because basically, whenever you bring the victim forward, and I've written about this before, whenever you bring the victim forward in a case of abuse and use their testimony of defending their abuser and say, see, the abuser's not that bad, you're basically just ignoring psychology and you're ignoring phenomenons we know about, things like Stockholm syndrome. And it is terrifying and offensive to see a major source like ESPN. We repeatedly bashed them for not being a news site, and they're not. We brought up Gamergate for like ethics in video game journalism, which I think is a silly thing for people to be arguing out the way they are, and they're not. But ESPN offends me on a regular basis when they try and act like journalists and stuff like this. But yeah, to your point, they want to sweep it under the rug. They don't want to correct it. They don't want to help it, and they don't want to even look at the fact that they may be the cause of it.
Right, and if they were just, I mean, I'd be less critical of them if they were just honest about it. Like pro wrestling, Vince McMahon, I think, is not. He goes for the lowest common denominator and doesn't really apologize for it. So I wouldn't say I'd like them more if they were more honest about it, but at least they'd be more intellectually honest. I don't know.
What you can look at is you can look at pro wrestling and just realize that you can be run by someone who is just a megalomaniac that's very upfront about screwing over people and gets into public fights with his people and acts, just as insane as Roger Goodell does.
And that's what's funny is we compliment Vince McMahon constantly on the show, and we constantly criticize the NFL. And I think even though they do all the same things, it's really just because of the honesty, right? It's weird.
And I don't know. I mean, I think one of the hard problems, and Malcolm Gladwell's talked about this. One of the hard problems is recognizing that someone can do something great and also be unethical, or at the bare minimum morally ambiguous, at the top level very unethical. And we talked a little bit about this. I forget if I brought it up in the actual segment we talked about it pre-show, but the halo effect, which is it's really, really hard to look at a person and view them as they can be both good and bad. They can be nuanced. There can be multiple problems. We tend to want to say Kobe Bryant's a good person, a good basketball player, a great role model, or Kobe Bryant's the horrible, he's the scum of the earth, and not kind of combine the two to say he's a good superstar player that doesn't seem to be a very good husband, definitely has sexual assault allegations, probably not a nice person at all, that kind of stuff. It's very hard to make that nuanced view. So, with Vince McMahon, it's easy to say, like, looking over the deaths of his wrestlers, looking over, the concussions, looking all over that, it's easy to say, yeah, he's a horrible person that's definitely exploited very talented athletes, and I do call them athletes. You're going to call figure skaters athletes, professional wrestlers are athletes. If you want to drop them both, then we have to start getting into golf and stuff, and there's just no fun there. But it's possible for him to be a great marketer, to know how to make a good product, to know how to build up characters, to know how to tell a story, and also not be a good person. But to your point, the reason we're less critical of him than we are of Goodell is it's like, well, you're not lying to our face. At least you're like, yeah, I took advantage of that person and I made a lot of money off them. Now they have a concussion and blah, 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 blah. As opposed to Roger Goodell, who's just like, yeah, there's no such thing as concussions. I haven't heard about concussions. What are concussions?
Yeah, I think the real problem is all these actions that they're taking is in their mind towards getting on some kind of moral high ground. And we all know that there is no high ground to stand on, right? So it's kind of a farce.
Yeah, I mean, Aziz Ansari had one of the greatest bits about this where he was talking about like being against gay marriage at this point. If you just look how the tides are turning, and just being like, you realize like you're on the wrong side of history at this point now, right? And I would argue like the same as like breaking the color barrier in sports and things like that. Like, I think it was what the Red Sox, one of the last teams to integrate, and it's like you realize you're not like history's not going to look back fondly at you, right? Like you're not just look like it's not even like demographics say it's like you are clearly losing at this point. And so the same thing is true with like the NFL. It's like they tried, we mentioned last week, they tried to shut down an academic conference, and they were actually very effective at it. But just as soon as like the actual New York Times pieces started coming out about them, it's like, oh, okay, this is bad. And then you start just then when it exploded, it's like, yeah, you're not in 30 years, no one's going to think Goodell was right about concussions. It's as simple as that.
No, the analogy I keep using is big tobacco.
Oh,
They
yeah, definitely.
they knew concussions were killing people years and years ago, and they just buried it, just like big tobacco did with the bad reports on what their products were doing to people. But then once people finally started figuring out there's a big enough public outcry, they're like, ah, my bad. Sorry, guys.
And to be fair, the annoying part about big tobacco is it clearly they were still making money. It's the that is such a perfect analogy because you explain why, right? They're basically making money hand over fist, and they're like, we are going to hold on to this golden goose for as long as we can, as long as we can. If we just lie another 5 years, that's millions more in our pockets. In the NFL's case, right, billions. And then the depressing part, by the way, the post mortem to that story is Philip Morris went out and bought Kraft, the food group, and basically now we start looking at our food and looking at all the horrible stuff, addictive things and ways they trick us and all that. And it's like, it's just same second verse, same as the first. It's a little depressing to be candid. So rest assured, as soon as the NFL goes down for whatever, I'm sure there will be another horrible sport to take advantage of human suffering ready to pop up, and it might even just still be football.
Hey, I just want to close by saying I'm as big a hypocrite as anyone on this. I love watching football, and it's troublesome, but it's just the way it is.
There's an interesting tragedy of the commons problem there, and one of my kind of general thoughts, it's actually a lot like boycotting the Olympics. I'm okay being morally outraged by things. In fact, if you follow me on Twitter, you notice I am a lot. But in terms of action, so for instance, after I think it was Ferguson, people were saying you should boycott Black Friday.
Oh
And I
yeah.
basically went, I don't even see how those two are connected. And in fact, by the way, Black Friday numbers were really down, and people were just like, customers didn't like it. So they didn't even look at it as a possibility of, people were boycotting us, which I, by the way, don't think they did. I think it's
I've
just,
heard a lot of theories about why the Black Friday numbers were down, but they're unrelated. So yeah, keep going.
well, I mean, they might be related, but I'm saying that's the perfect point, right? The numbers were down, and I didn't hear a single news story that said outcry over Ferguson resulted in a dip in Black Friday numbers,
Right.
Congress debating passing a bill. No, it's just people like, Black Friday numbers are down. Economists speculate. One of the common ones I've heard, which seems to make a lot of sense, is people out of money or people are spending their money on more responsible stuff. So, but I'm just saying, when you look at an action and say, I'm going to do this action in protest of this, you can ask yourself one of two questions. The Freakonomics guys brought this up. You can say, I'm doing this action to make myself feel good. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, driving a Prius, this is going to be offensive. Driving a Prius is going to do nothing to solve global warming. The issue,
How dare you? Sorry,
yeah,
keep going.
exactly. And the Freakonomics guys have gotten so much flack over this. Basically, we look at how screwed up the environment is at this point. If we want to fix climate change, getting our emissions levels back to 1950s levels or whatever isn't going to do it. We need to do something more. So you're in a Prius, that's great. You're not doing anything to solve the problem. Sorry, you're basically, at this point, that's not going to help it. That's not going to fix it. We need to do other stuff. And hopefully we'll have a government that invests in smart scientists that'll do it, or we'll have a government that is full of climate change deniers. One of the two. And the point being, okay, you can do that action to make yourself feel good. And there's nothing wrong with that. Or you can try and do actions that will fix the problem. And you just have to be cognizant of the difference. And so you might say to yourself, I'm a horrible person because on Sundays I don't turn off the TV. And the out I'll give people listening and watching who may be going through the same exact problem is, unfortunately, that's not going to fix the problem. You would need so many people to shut off their TVs. It's a tragedy of the commons issue. But that's what's going to need to change. And like the wide scale change that may fix quote unquote football is, just decreased enrollment in Little League. That may fix it. So, if you want to do something to make yourself feel good, Brian, don't watch football on Friday. But I'll just be candid and say, if you turn off the TV on Friday or Sunday, that's like the only day they don't do football. They do football Thursday, Sunday, Monday, and I say Friday. You turn off the TV on Sunday or Saturday if you're watching college, I guess. You're not going to fix the problem, so don't feel bad about
Hey, trust me, I haven't felt bad about it. Not so far.
it. All right, so yeah. I gave you an easy out, and then you had to like Charles Barkley the end and
No.
be like, you know what? I'm doubling down. I'm going to stick with the statement.
Yeah.
So actually, ironically, we started with ESPN 30 for 30 on college sports and ended up just kind of talking. I mean, I guess obviously Ferguson and stuff gave us more areas to talk about the other stuff, obviously, Ray Rice. So maybe we'll have to save that for another day because I think we've gone a decent amount and I don't necessarily want to go much longer. Same spiel as always. Was busy for the holidays, so didn't get as much done. What I'm planning on doing is we are gonna be moving the show to a new feed. I'll let you know when that happens. I will keep updating the RSS for both the feed and this show, and just saying, hey, a new episode is up here to hopefully, because I don't want to lose you guys. And I still will be putting the notes up at the Boxscore Geeks, but just keep that on your radar. We'll be moving the feed to a different one in the near future, changing the show title and all that. But with that said, I'm ready to go to shout outs. I'm gonna have to think about a poll, Brian. So if you have an idea, send one along. So I haven't decided what I'll do for this week. I'm probably not gonna do one about Ferguson. I'll probably do one about the 76ers. Oh, by the way, the 76ers.
Audience, were you offended by Dre's Prius comment? No, I don't like that one.
The 76ers do not start the season with an 0-18 losing streak. All right. And, they may be able to, there's still plenty of time to get that 26th win or loss losing streak under the bag. But the 76ers did manage to win. Congratulations. And true to form, Michael Carter Williams shot 9 for 20 with 6 turnovers. So definitely a Russell Westbrook game. He did get 20 points, 9 rebounds, and 9 assists, though. So people will definitely say, thanks to Michael Carter Williams' heroics, they managed to pull it out. All right, so with that, I'm going to lead us in. That's what I'll probably ask. The poll will probably be something about the 76ers and will they manage to hit the 26 loss losing streak now that they've won a game? Because there's still time. All right, so on to that, we have shout outs. I'm going to let you start, Brian, because, we've had a few weeks in a row now where I've said, Brian, shout outs. You've been like, it's okay. And so you have a funny story about that, too. And that is saying it like the cool people, Dan dash Striker spelled with a Y. So STRYKER.com. That is an awesome name too, by the way. Excellent. Okay, and I have 2 shout outs to give. As I mentioned, I did start talking about how absurd it is about rioting. And so my tweet that the 2 tweets I tweeted out is I said, all this talk about rioting and looting being 100% evil and never acceptable, fine, except part of the US's history glorifies that. And then I had a second tweet, we teach everyone about the Boston Tea Party as a positive event. Part of the right even adopted it as their party name. Come on now. And Jeb, and you mentioned, so I think it's Tatsumaki for Ryu, and you said you think that's Ryu's spinning kick, said, Patriots would tar and feather tax collectors. People apparently think that was like giving someone a noogie. So I love that follow-up point. Again, just another part of history people gloss over, act as if the Patriots in the Revolutionary War were perfect and didn't hurt anybody, didn't hurt any property. Nothing possibly went wrong, but act like current events are outrageous. And yes, I am drawing parallels to those. And yeah, I'll probably just delete any comments if you come out outraged at me. Anyway, outrage. And then the other shout out I've got to give is to Lisa Thinks a Lot on YouTube. Another great content provider that I met this weekend. We talked a lot about blogging, video blogging, etc. Has some great topics. She does about a 4-minute video once a week. She's a web developer. Fun stuff to talk about. So definitely enjoyed that. Subscribe to her channel on YouTube after you've subscribed to ours if you haven't already. But as I mentioned, we might be moving, so maybe save the subscribe for us, but definitely subscribe to her right away. So that's all I got, Brian. Just seems like news isn't. This is the great part about the regular season going. News isn't going to stop. The real world isn't going to stop. Teams aren't going to stop losing or winning or surprising us. So we'll have plenty for you next week, but I don't even have an idea as to what it will be. So we'll see you then.